Rich man orders in a foreign language to humiliate her. He never expected this reply. The dining room at Riverside Manor was quiet that Tuesday evening, the kind of quiet that comes just before the dinner rush, when the chandeliers glow soft and golden, and the white tablecloths seem to hold their breath. Margaret stood near the kitchen door, smoothing down her pink blouse with one hand, her order pad tucked into the pocket of her gray skirt. She was 54 years old, and she'd been waiting tables at this restaurant for nearly 12 years now. Her ponytail swung gently as she turned to check the seating chart. She'd always worn her hair this way, practical, she called it. Her daughter Emily used to tease her about it when she was younger. "Mom, you could try something different," Emily would say, standing in their little bathroom back home, experimenting with makeup before school dances. But Margaret liked what worked. She liked reliability. After raising Emily mostly on her own, working double shifts when her husband left them both 20 years ago, Margaret had learned that consistency was its own kind of comfort. She glanced at the reservation list. Table 7. A couple. No special requests noted, but she could see through the tall windows that a black Mercedes had just pulled up outside. She watched as a man in a sharp blue suit stepped out, straightening his jacket with the kind of careful attention that suggested he knew people were watching. His dark hair was swept back perfectly, and even from here, she could see the glint of an expensive watch catching the light. The woman with him wore a dress the color of fresh roses, bright and beautiful. Her blonde hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and she laughed at something the man said, though Margaret noticed the laugh didn't quite reach her eyes. The hostess led them to table 7, right in Margaret's section. Margaret picked up 2 menus and walked over with the calm, easy stride she developed over years of carrying heavy trays and navigating crowded dining rooms without ever spilling a drop. "Good evening," she said, her voice warm and steady. "Welcome to Riverside Manor. My name's Margaret, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." The man, his name was Blake, though she didn't know it yet, barely looked at her. He was busy adjusting his napkin, settling into his chair like he owned not just the table but the entire room. The woman, whose name was Vanessa, offered Margaret a small, apologetic smile. "Can I start you folks off with something to drink?" Margaret asked, standing with her pen ready. Blake finally glanced up. His eyes were cold, assessing. He looked at Margaret the way some people look at furniture, something present, functional, but entirely beneath notice. "We'll have a bottle of the 2015 Chateau Margaux," he said. Then, without warning, he switched languages, speaking rapidly in what Margaret recognized as French. She'd heard it before, many times, though it had been years since she'd spoken it herself. Vanessa's cheeks flushed pink. She looked down at her hands, twisting the corner of her napkin. Blake continued speaking in French, his tone sharp and amused, clearly saying something meant to exclude Margaret, something meant to make her feel small. He gestured dismissively toward her, and Vanessa's flush deepened. Margaret stood perfectly still. She'd seen this before. In 12 years of waiting tables, she'd seen all kinds of people. The ones who snapped their fingers. The ones who sent back perfectly good food just to watch someone apologize. The ones who needed to prove they were important by making someone else feel less than. She took a slow breath, the kind she used to take when Emily was little and threw a tantrum in the grocery store. Patience, dignity, those were the things that mattered. Blake finished his comment in French and sat back, looking pleased with himself. Vanessa wouldn't meet Margaret's eyes. Margaret smiled. A real smile, the kind that came from somewhere deep and unshakable. "I'll get that wine for you right away," she said in perfect, gentle French, her accent carrying the soft precision of someone who'd spent a summer in Paris long ago, when she was young and the world still felt full of possibilities. And perhaps, she continued in French, still smiling, you might consider that kindness costs nothing, and cruelty, no matter what language it's spoken in, reveals far more about the speaker than the listener. Blake's face went pale, then red. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Margaret switched back to English, her voice as calm as still water. I'll be right back with that wine. She turned and walked toward the bar, her heart beating steady and strong. In the kitchen, she leaned against the stainless steel counter for just a moment. Carlos, the head chef, looked over from where he was plating a beautiful piece of salmon. You okay, Maggie? She nodded. Just another evening in paradise, Carlos. He grinned. That's what I like about you. Nothing gets to you. But that wasn't quite true. Things got to her. She just didn't let them win. She thought about Emily, who was 28 now, living 2 states away, working as a nurse. Emily called every Sunday, without fail. Last week, she'd told Margaret about a patient who'd been rude to her, who'd yelled and blamed her for things that weren't her fault. What did you do, Mom? Emily had asked. What did you do? Margaret had replied. I took care of him anyway. Did my job. Treated him with respect. Then you already know what to do, Margaret had said. Now, carrying the expensive bottle of wine back to table 7, Margaret felt that same certainty. You don't meet cruelty with cruelty. You meet it with who you are. Blake was quieter when she returned. He didn't look at her as she presented the bottle, showed him the label, and poured a small taste for his approval. He nodded curtly. She filled both glasses and set the bottle in the ice bucket. Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes? Vanessa spoke up for the first time, her voice soft. Could you give us just a few more minutes, please? Of course. Margaret smiled at her. Take your time. As she walked away, she heard Vanessa's voice, low and urgent, speaking to Blake. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear enough. Someone was standing up for what was right. Margaret checked on her other tables. A retired couple celebrating their 45th anniversary, a business group laughing over appetizers, a young family with a toddler who kept dropping his spoon and giggling. She brought the little boy an extra spoon and his mother thanked her with the exhausted gratitude of someone who was just trying to get through dinner without a meltdown. I remember those days, Margaret said kindly. Seems like yesterday my daughter was that age. Now she's saving lives at a hospital 3 states away. The mother's eyes got a little misty. They grow up so fast, don't they? They do, Margaret agreed. But they also grow up right. If you love them through it. When she returned to table 7, Vanessa looked up with an expression that was hard to read. Part embarrassment, part curiosity, part something else. Respect, maybe. Blake cleared his throat. We're ready to order. Margaret took out her pad. Blake ordered the steak, medium rare. Vanessa ordered the sea bass. Their voices were polite now, almost formal. Excellent choices, Margaret said. She paused, then added gently, the sea bass is particularly beautiful. Tonight, Chef caught it fresh this morning from his brother's boat. Vanessa smiled. A real smile this time. Thank you. The dinner service moved like a quiet river. Margaret brought bread, refilled water glasses, delivered their meals with care. She didn't hover, didn't intrude, but she was there when needed, invisible when not. At one point, she saw Vanessa excuse herself to the restroom. A few minutes later, as Margaret was passing by with a tray of desserts for another table, Vanessa caught her eye near the hallway. "Excuse me, Margaret." Margaret set down the tray at the service station and walked over. "Yes, ma'am." Vanessa's eyes were bright. "Maybe from the wine, maybe from something else. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about earlier. That wasn't okay." Margaret shook her head gently. "You have nothing to apologize for. You weren't the one who spoke unkindly." "No, but I didn't say anything either." Vanessa looked down. "I should have." "Well," Margaret said, her voice soft but firm, "sometimes it takes us a minute to find our courage. The important thing is that we find it eventually." Vanessa looked up, really looked at Margaret for the first time. "Where did you learn French? If you don't mind my asking." Margaret smiled, and for a moment she was 23 again, walking along the Seine with a backpack and a heart full of dreams. "I spent a summer in Paris, a long time ago. Before my daughter was born. Before life got complicated." She paused. "I was studying art history. Thought I might work in a museum someday. What happened? Life," Margaret said simply. "I got pregnant, got married, got divorced, raised my girl, worked to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads." She smiled. "But you know what? I wouldn't trade it, not for anything. Emily, my daughter, she's the best thing I ever did." Vanessa's eyes were definitely misty now. "You must be very proud of her." "I am," Margaret said. "And I bet your mama's proud of you too." Vanessa let out a small, surprised laugh. "I hope so." They stood there for a moment in the quiet hallway, two women from completely different worlds, connected by something simple and true. "You should get back to your dinner," Margaret said gently, "before it gets cold." "Thank you," Vanessa said, "for everything." When Margaret brought the dessert menus later, Blake spoke up before she could set them down. "I'd like to apologize," he said. The words came out stiff, unpracticed, but they came out. "What I said earlier was inappropriate and disrespectful." Margaret met his eyes. She could see he was uncomfortable, that this didn't come naturally to him. But he was trying. Sometimes that was enough. "I appreciate that," she said. "Thank you." He nodded, looking relieved. Vanessa reached across the table and squeezed his hand. They ordered dessert. Creme brulee for her, coffee for him. When Margaret brought the check, there was a moment of quiet as Blake reviewed it. Then he pulled out his wallet and placed several bills on the table, far more than the total. "Thank you for your excellent service," he said, and this time, he actually looked at her when he said it. "It was my pleasure," Margaret replied. As they stood to leave, Vanessa turned back one more time. "It was really nice meeting you, Margaret." "You too, honey. You take care of yourself." After they left, Margaret cleared the table. Underneath the cash, Blake had left a tip that was nearly 70% of the bill. But more than that, he'd left a handwritten note on the back of his business card. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Thank you." Margaret tucked the card into her apron pocket and carried the dishes back to the kitchen. Carlos looked up from the grill. "How'd it go with the fancy folks?" "Better than expected," Margaret said. "That's usually how it goes with you, Maggie. You got some kind of magic." She laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "No magic, Carlos. Just a lot of practice being human." That night, driving home in her old Honda, Margaret thought about the evening. She thought about Blake, who needed to learn that power without kindness is just emptiness. She thought about Vanessa, who was learning to find her voice. She thought about that summer in Paris, when she'd been so young, when everything had seemed possible. She thought about Emily, and the life she'd built, and the lessons she'd learned along the way. Not from books or classrooms, but from living. From choosing, again and again, to be kind even when kindness wasn't required. To be dignified even when dignity wasn't respected. To be herself even when the world suggested she should be less. When she got home, she made herself a cup of tea and called Emily. "Hey, Mom," Emily answered, sounding happy. "I was just thinking about you. Good thoughts, I hope. Always. How was work?" Margaret smiled, settling into her favorite chair. "You know what, honey? It was a good night. A really good night." And as she told Emily the story, leaving out the parts that didn't matter and emphasizing the ones that did, Margaret felt that familiar warmth in her chest. The feeling of having lived well, of having chosen right, of having been exactly who she was supposed to be. If this story touched your heart, I'd be so grateful if you'd take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Share it with someone who could use a reminder that kindness and dignity never go out of style. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had a moment where patience and grace changed a difficult situation? Your stories matter, and I can't wait to read them. Thanks so much for listening, friends.